Assalamu alaikum dear students, I am Farooq Abdullah with the history of English literature. And of course our today's topic is restoration period. In our previous video lecture we discussed the literary characteristics of restoration age. And in today's lecture we are going to discuss restoration age, restoration period in respect of drama, in respect of poetry and in respect of prose. So in this short video lecture, we'll try to sum up the major works and the major writers of restoration period in the field of poetry, drama and prose. I think that I have told you people in my previous lecture that John Drydon is the literary figure in restoration period who dominates all these three genres, like poetry, like prose, like drama. He is the most important and the dominant literary figure in this restoration period, and that is the reason that this entire age is called the age of Dryden. So this is the reason, that's why actually this age is called the age of Dryden, because all three genres of English in restoration period are dominated by John Drydon. So first we are going to talk about the poetry of restoration period. So as I'm saying that John Drydon dominates all these three genres, John Drydon is the most prominent figure in poetry that was composed during restoration period, and honestly speaking, John Drydon is the only poet worth mentioning in the poetry that was composed during restoration period. As far as his style is concerned, and as far as his art is concerned, and as far as his poetic genius is concerned, his poetry is not that appealing. He is not, that is not worth appreciating. Why then he is famous? He is famous for being a stylist, and he is famous for being a reasoner. You know that the subject matter that he presents in his poetry, that is worth appreciating. As far as genuine poetic genius is concerned, so he lacked that poetic genius in his poetry. So that's why he's called a reasoner, that's why he is called a stylist, and his fame actually lies only in this feature, that he was a stylist and he was a reasoner in his poetry. When he was on his initial stage of poetry, when he was initially composing his poetry, he was really impressed and influenced by the thoughts of Abraham Cowley. And you know well that Abraham Cowley belonged to metaphysical school of thought. So initial poetry that was composed by John Drydon, that is just like metaphysical poetry. He uses exaggeration, he uses metaphors, he uses conceits. So because he was impressed by Abraham Cowley, but later on in his later phase of poetry, he emancipated himself. He got rid of the features of metaphysical poetry, and then he set his own trend. He made his own mark, and importantly, he laid the foundation of classical school of thought that we'll study in our next age, that is actually classical age. So he was the person, actually John Drydon was the person who laid the foundation of classical school of thought. Now talking about the poetry of John Drydon, his poetry can be studied and it can be analyzed under three dimensions. His poetry regarding politics, that is called his political stires, and then his doctrinal poems, and then his fables. So these are three dimensions, these are three heads under which the poetry of John Drydon can be analyzed. If we talk about his political stires, the famous political stire is Absalom and Actiful. This is a stire, this is a political stire in which he defends king against the Earl of Shaftesbury. So and if we talk about his doctrinal poems, as I am talking about that his poetry can be analyzed under three dimensions. one political styles. Now we are talking about doctrinal poems. In fact, his doctrinal poems are a little bit controversial in English literature. Doctrinal poems, actually, it doesn't mean that he wrote religious poems. These are theological poems. You know why these poems are called, somehow controversial? Because initially he was a Protestant, and he propagated the cause of Protestantism in his poetry that was composed in his initial phase. And after it, he embraced Catholicism, and the poetry that he composed after being Catholic, that poetry is quite different. And each of the phase, whether he was writing for the cause of Protestantism or he was writing for the cause of Catholicism, his poetry is vigorous. He supports the cause of both the sects, whether he was writing poetry about Catholics or whether he was writing poetry about Protestants. That is appealing, that is convincing. For example, his poetry that he composed when he was Catholic, the Hind and the Panther. This is very important work, a very famous work of John Drydon. Now talking about the fables that he wrote. Fables means the stories. And as far as John Drydon is concerned, he is said to be a great storyteller in English literature, because those stories were not written in prose, as we are talking about the poetry of John Drydon. These fables were actually written in verse. These are poetic tales, poetic fables. These are matchless. And one of his odes, that is Alexander's Feast, that is also very famous in English literature. So this was all about the poetry of Restoration period. As I have mentioned, that only John Drydon was the person who was worth mentioning in the entire poetry that was composed during Restoration period. Now we are talking about the drama of Restoration period. In my previous lecture, I told you people that another achievement of the writers of Restoration period was the invention of comedy of manners. So comedy of manners was the important feature in the drama of Restoration period, and the great name in comedy of manners is, of course, William Congreve. William Congreve has a great place in English literature for writing dramas in prose. So he was a dramatist, he was a playwright who wrote dramas in prose, and he earned a lot of fame in English language and English literature, being a prose writer in drama. So William Congreve, his for example, his play Love for Love is quite famous in English literature. And the other name, of course, that will be John Drydon, who is famous for writing heroic tragedies and for using heroic couplet. So that's about the drama. And I have told you people about a comedy of manners, that in that kind of comedy, manners and the conduct and the behavior of aristocratic people that were discussed, that were highlighted in that drama. And you all know well that drama was, it was abandoned after the death of Shakespeare. We don't see any particular work in drama in English literature after the death of Shakespeare. And then theatres were banned by Charles I in 1642. So that's why these are the reasons that there wasn't any particular drama in this period. So when the age was changed, after 1660, the mental preoccupations of the people had also changed. The norms and the conditions of the age had changed. So that's why the drama of Elizabethan age had become a thing of past for the writers of Restoration period. That's why we don't see that zeal, that zest, enthusiasm, sentiments, passion in the drama of Restoration period. That's a trifling drama, that's ordinary drama. And let me tell you people that the drama of Elizabethan age, that was for common people, for the common masses. But the drama of Restoration period was not for the common people. That was not for the common public. That was for aristocratic class. That was meant for aristocratic class, and all the follies and absurdities of aristocratic class were highlighted and were presented on the stage. And the audience was chiefly aristocratic class. It was produced for the rich people, and common people had nothing to do with the drama of Restoration period. Now coming towards the prose of Restoration period, and of course in the prose of Restoration period, John Drydon is again a dominant and prominent figure. His essay on dramatic poesy is well known. That's quite famous in English literature. And another person, I must not forget mentioning his name, John Bunyan. He's also called a precursor of English novel. Dear students, the English literature that we have studied so far, we have been talking about poetry, we have been talking about drama, we have been talking about prose, but we didn't talk about novel. Isn't it so? Yes, it is so. We didn't talk about novel. Why? We haven't talked about novel. The reason is that novel was unknown till Restoration period in English literature. There wasn't any novel in English literature till Elizabethan, till Restoration period. So as I'm saying that John Bunyan is called precursor to English novel, it means that novel was started after Restoration period. It wasn't composed till Restoration. The major work of John Bunyan is his Pilgrim's Progress. This Pilgrim's Progress is actually similar to the Paradise Lost of John Milton. And John Milton states about Paradise Lost that it is to justify the ways of God to man. In the same way, this John Bunyan's work, The Pilgrim's Progress, this has also a similar theme. The theme of Pilgrim's Progress is to lead men and women to the ways of God, to God's ways. So that's quite similar to the theme of Paradise Lost. And both the writers like John Bunyan and John Milton, they were religious in nature. The difference is that John Milton wrote Paradise Lost in poetry, that is epic, but John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress is in prose. This is an allegory as well, and I have told you people that what is called an allegory in English literature. This is a story of a Christian who goes to visit a heavenly city, and he faces a lot of troubles, tribulations and temptation on his way, but he kicks everything apart and he achieves his destination. So John Bunyan was a person who laid the foundation of novel in English literature, that will study that how it was developed by Henry Fielding and Jane Austen and other novelists that will study. When we're talking about prose, that prose was the prominent characteristic, the prominent quality of the writers and the literary figures of Restoration period. Definitely it will come in your mind that sir, prose was already there in English literature, that was being written by King Alfred in Anglo-Saxon age, Anglo-Norman age. In Anglo-Norman age there was prose, and there was prose in Elizabethan age. Francis Bacon was writing prose. So then what was the difference between that prose and this prose? The difference is that the prose that Francis Bacon was writing, that was replete with epigrammatic style, that had a very that style appealed only aristocratic class, only people belonging to higher strata of society. They could understand and they could get benefit out of the prose that was written by Francis Bacon. But the prose that the writers of Restoration period wrote, that kind of prose was quite common to propagate and to convey common ideas, general ideas for the general public. So that was the difference. And this prose was quite simple. It was quite to the point. It was quite accurate. It was precise. So these were some of the elements of the prose written by the writers of Restoration period, because of which it is said that Restoration period is famous for its prose, famous for its realism, famous for its preciseness, and famous for comedy of manners. Dear students, I have tried my level best to sum it up in these a few minutes. I cannot, go further long because it's quite difficult for me to upload these videos on YouTube and to send in your WhatsApp groups. I hope that I have made my point clear. If you still feel any inconvenience with my lecture, you can ask me, you can talk to me. God bless you all. Stay happy. Assalamu alaikum.